Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 208. So glad you could join me. Today's guest, Pedro Poitevin, is here. He'll be with us in just a few minutes, but before we begin, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been a continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this. We love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Leave reviews. I guess the most important thing on iTunes is to follow. So just make sure you're following us. Even if you don't listen on iTunes, follow us on iTunes. And that's the most important thing to boost our algorithm and make sure that poetry is spread around the internet. And when you hear about anything, topics related to poetry or these poets that we have every week, they'll show up in people's podcast feeds, and that'd be a nice thing. So do make sure you're following us on iTunes and Spotify and all of those things. Now, before we begin with the main poet, we always start with a news poem. And Robin Turner couldn't be here today, but she had a beautiful poem, Little Bird. And I'll read her note to start with, a really short note right here. There we go. She says, "A poem of gratitude for my husband, his good heart in a time of great personal loss, of grief for our burning world, and fear for the fragile future of American democracy." And that's what Robin had to say about this beautiful poem. And of course, the link there is to the mugshots of Trump and all the other people that were indicted this week. So that was the news story that inspired this poem, as well as personal things. And what we love about Poetry Respond always is bringing news and the personal and the music of poetry all into one object. And that's what we have here with Robin Turner's Little Bird for Artie. The hottest month of the hottest year on record. August in Texas, unrelenting. Mother had died just the month before. My mother. The world kept burning. And on the news, on our phones, all week the photos of treasonous men, their arrogant mugshots marrying every screen, suffocating each sensible citizen. How to breathe through the heat, through the spin and the grief. How to rescue from harm what one loves. When a red-feathered bird crashed into our window, it fell like a stone and lay motionless. Little bird, you said, and stepped out to the porch, bent to stroke, to tap-tap her still chest. Brought ice, brought tenderness, prayed mercy. In the morning you spared me from shoveling parched earth and gave up the lost creature to ground. You knew I would not be able to bury her. One more once beautiful thing. And that was Sunday's poem. That beautiful ending is what sold the poem. I love the poem in the first place as we were moving in, and then that last line is just one of those ones that sticks with you and hits home. So thanks so much for sharing that, Robin. That was Robin Turner with Little Bird. And now right away we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Pedro Poitevin. So sit tight and I'll make sure everything's working. I'll be right back with Pedro. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Pedro Poitevin. Pedro is a mathematician, translator, and bilingual poet living in Salem, Massachusetts. His Spanish language book of poems titled Perplejidades was published by Cooperativa La Joplin in early 2015 in Mexico. His columns and poems in Spanish have appeared in Letras Libres, Partisan Magazine, many other venues. His first book in English, Nowhere at Home, was just published by Penteract Press. I have it right here. Features many traditional forms, including palindromic and self-describing poetry. All sorts of wonderful stuff in this book. You know, if you follow the Rattlecast, you know that I love formal verse. Wish we had more of it to publish, because it's a very small percentage of what we get in submissions. But here he is, Pedro Poitevin, with this wonderful book. Hey, Pedro, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Tim. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really my pleasure having you on. I've looked for, I've enjoyed your work so much and all the creative things you do in poetry. So it's really cool to have you on and to look through this book and how many different forms and how much experimenting and playful ways you have of approaching poetry. It's going to be really fun looking through these poems today. Do you want to start with one of them?
Sure, thank you. I will begin with the opening poem in the book, which is called Under the Bedroom Skylight. Scanning the sky this way and that to keep the light those distant galaxies emit, we sense our insignificance, how time dissolves like snow on seawater. We peek beyond Andromeda and dream a wolf gazes at us with quasar eyes and loops around while night unwinds the cosmic spool. We lie intent on stillness, but still flow. We seem to stay together, but we part. And as we spiral into mindless doom, our fingers meet and weave a mellow mood that thaws the rim of Morpheus' strap. Your index leads the way through clouds and peels away the layers of darkness till we sleep.
Yeah, beautiful poem there. That was Under the Bedroom Skylight, the opening poem to Pedro Poitevin's new book, Nowhere at Home, from Penteract Press. And Pedro, it's just fascinating to have a mathematician on who is also a poet. I think that's the first. We've had a couple astrophysicists. We've had some biologists. We've never had a mathematician before. And can you explain a little bit about your journey into poetry through math? I mean, did the poem come first, or how do those interests connect?
That's an excellent question. I grew up in a family of people who were literary and in the humanities. My grandfather was a poet, and my uncle was a poet as well. There were several poets in the family. In fact, my great-grandmother was also a poet and a self-taught mathematician, as it turns out. I was the sort of like the black sheep of the family, in that I decided to follow the path of mathematics rather than the path of the humanities. But when I came to the US and I did my PhD in math, I worked as a mathematician. And about 12, 13 years ago, I began playing on Twitter at that time. That I think this was 2009. And there was a vibrant community of poets who were playing around with palindromes. So text that you can read forwards and backwards in the same way. So there's symmetric sequences of letters. And it turned out that I was good at that. I approached it like an algebraic problem, right? I was trying to solve an equation of sorts. And little by little, I began to discover the beauty or rediscover the beauty of poetry. I grew up listening to my grandfather declaim poems of Quevedo, for example, who is one of the great poets of the Spanish language, by heart. And so I was familiar with the music, and it meant something to me. And little by little, I regained that love of poetry and liberated myself from the straitjacket of the palindrome and started writing sonnets and other forms.
Mm-hmm. It's said kind of frequently that math is the poetry of the natural world and things like that. Do you feel that way? Is there a connection? Like, what is the love of math? How does that relate to poetry? How are the two similar? I mean, there is a kind of there's a way that like great poems sort of click at the end of them, and you feel like that the rightness in the same way. I took a few as an undergraduate advanced math classes where it was mostly like theorem based and trying to solve, like discover pi yourself and things like that. And there's a way that when you finally get these massive equations to click and it like adds up and both sides of the equal sign are like right, there is that feeling of like it clicks together like a poem does when it's like perfectly done. Is that the way that it relates? How do you feel like math and poetry relate as subjects of interest?
That's an excellent question. I think that there are many different ways in which they relate, and they differ, of course. There is a preoccupation with precision in mathematical language. So you want to cast away, ambiguity. But in poetry, you actually cultivate ambiguity to some degree, even though precision is a very valued poetic attribute in writing. But I think that one of the deepest connections, and I don't mean that these are tight connections, but they're deep connections between mathematics and poetry, is that both of them, I think, are systems of symbolic manipulation that work best when they render things that are apparently dissimilar similar. Like they reveal the similarity between concepts or ideas or images that are dissimilar in the first approach. So in mathematics, some of the deepest theorems are theorems that connect ideas that seem completely disparate. And in poetry, I think that something similar happens, that we are manipulating symbols, language, in order to reveal something to us, to ourselves, and to others. So I think that that's one connection. Another is the layerings of meaning in mathematics. One of the deepest theorems of the 20th century was Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which reveals that there's a deep connection between syntax and the semantics of arithmetic. And it's very complicated to explain, but what in poetry, I feel like when we are writing poetry, we often try to do something similar. We try to play, or at least in my case, I do, with different layers of the poem. So there's the words in the poem, but then there's the imagery, and then there's the sound in the poem, and then there are the choices that you make along the way. And there's a structure, an architecture that is relating different layers of the poem, much like what happens sometimes in deep mathematics. So I think that that's where all that aesthetic pleasure comes from me.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've already made me think about math and poetry in a different way, because think of that equal sign as a metaphor, as like the cut in a haiku, or like the colon in those word problems where this is to this is this is to this, and that being the heart of sort of all our understanding. It's sort of like what we bootstrap our knowledge from. It's just saying like this thing is like this thing, and then we build our entire conception of the world from that. And so it's really interesting to think of poetry and math as doing the same thing through a similar process, even though they're different, ways of coding that comparison.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I think Jorge Luis Borges, study in one of his stories. It's called Funes the Memorious, and Funes is incapable of thinking because he remembers everything. And so for him, for example, the dog that passes at 10 a.m. walking down the street is not the same dog, even though for us it's the same dog, than the one that passes at 2 p.m. on the way back or whatever. He sees the difference between the two dogs. There's some changes in the number of hairs that the dogs have, etc. And Funes is incapable of abstraction. Precisely, he can't really lump together different instances of a concept into a class, because he sees all those differences and he remembers them all. So Borges has this insight that that thinking or abstracting is forgetting. It's necessary to forget things in order to think abstractly. And I think that mathematicians have a concept for that, equivalence relations. We use that. And in poetry, I think that we're playing with those kinds of equivalence relations, which are metaphors in our case.
Yeah, that's interesting. And talking about the similarities between poetry and mathematics, what are the differences too? Like, is there something that you get out of doing poetry that you don't get out of math? Is it a way of like working your brain in different ways so you stay more rounded, or keeping your emotions as part of it? And what is it that you get out of poetry? Like, why do both when we would think that they're so dissimilar, even though they have these sort of strange, similarities that we just talked about? They're also like, that concept of the right brain and the left brain, they're as far apart as you can get,
Right.
and so what is it that you get out of being a poet while you're also a mathematician?
That's an excellent question again. I think I arrived at poetry um, out of intellectual curiosity, right? I wanted to see what was possible, what you could do. And I was stimulated by it as some sort of algebraic problem. But in the course of playing around with it, I discovered that I had really arrived at poetry out of emotional necessity, disguised as intellectual curiosity. And I think that that's what that cling, it clings my relationship to poetry because or it reveal the revelation for me is that when I'm doing poetry, I become more attuned to my inner self and to my own emotional needs, which are not so clear to me when I'm thinking analytically in the mode of a mathematician or a logician. It's hard. There's an estrangement that happens when your mind is is operating in this very analytical way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of the way that certain inventors and scientists over the time have used dreams. Famously, like the structure of benzene came in a dream, the double
That's right.
helix to Watson and Crick of a snake sort of coiled around itself, coming in a dream. It's something to do with fire. I can't remember exactly the story, but certain ways that like trying to fight through rationally to make some kind of thing connect. Then we have this like subconscious working and working and working, and it comes out in dreams and it comes out in poetry. I don't know what kind of math that you do actually, but do you work on things where you're looking for solutions, and does the poetry help with that, with finding solutions to the problems you're facing?
I don't think it has ever worked to help me find answers to mathematical problems, but um, but the process by which I find answers to mathematical problems is very similar to the process of finding. So it's also dreams are very important. Or I struggled with a problem for a long time, and then I was in the metro in Paris, and I remember distinctly that I had this idea, and I knew that the idea was going to work. And this was an idea that would juggle like probably over tens of different inequalities had to work out.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these inequalities did work out, but I had the strong intuition that I had already figured out the whole thing. And it was just a moment, a moment, an instant of illumination, enlightenment, which is similar to what happens when you write a poem. When you come to the idea of a poem, sometimes there's a moment of enlightenment, at least in my case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I should say we should keep going through sharing more poems. Let's read another one before we continue the discussion, which is fascinating.
Sure, I will read Identity, which is on page 11. You seem to be a bird about to flee, wings parted almost imperceptibly, but could have been a bird about to sing, beak on the verge of opening. You could have been 1,000 other birds that wouldn't fly or flew without these words. And as your eyes met mine, that sudden glance, perhaps a truth subdued by happenstance, you flew.
And that was Identity. Again, we're having Poems from Nowhere at Home, Pedro Poitevin's newest book from Penteract Press. And you can see in both the poems that we've seen that formalism, meter is so important to what you write. But you said you started out with palindromes and sort of that kind of wordplay. So what was your process like from discovering, moving from that palindrome community that you mentioned, which I didn't even know existed, except for your publisher with Penteract, was the only other palindrome poet I know. We've since we published a word palindrome poem in the summer issue, so now I know two other palindrome poets. I think that's Anthony Etherin, is that his name?
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. So now I know three. But but how did you move from that palindrome type of poetry into metrical poetry and the whole verse community, which is just there's a wonderful community based there in Massachusetts, and I'm curious how you found them, and was that part of your moving into meter and rhyme?
Yeah, so first, I started writing palindromes on Twitter, and Aurelio Essien, who is a brilliant Mexican poet, discovered me on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And he instructed me. He actually helped me polish my formal poetry. He told me, you're really good at this palindrome thing. Why don't you write a sonnet that is a palindrome? And that was a challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So I did, but in the course of doing so, I needed to understand meter and the structure of a sonnet and the strictures of the form and all other forms. So I got very much into it, and at some point I realized that I really was more of a poet than I was a palindrome writer. I mean, I am good at palindrome writing, but it's the poetry that really appeals to me. Mm-hmm. And then in Massachusetts, I met Rina Espaillat, who is like a second mother to me, and to whom this book is dedicated. And I learned a lot from her. And from other people that I ran into in different workshops and other environments about poetry, just in general. I have a very expansive sensibility, so I don't think of myself merely or solely as a formal poet, but the formal poetry is a little bit easier for me. For just like Robert Frost says, like writing a good free verse poem is like playing tennis without the net, and mm-hmm. It's a little harder for me to guide myself in that.
Do you write free verse poems? I think it seems like there's some kind of conceit or behind most of the poems in this book, at least. Is that something that you do often? I'm curious about how there's a way that I think having some kind of formal structure. Whether it's, you have, poems based on the Fibonacci sequence, and you have poems based on airport codes, and you have poems that are palindromes, and you have, all the formal verse in here. Some structure helps sort of quiet the rational mind. I think that's the main thing. It's almost like, saying, hey, here, juggle these while I, let my subconscious play for the first time in a while. And is it hard to find that in a free verse poem, and how often are you able to?
That's a great question. So I have a couple of free verse poems in the book, I believe. One of them, At the Harbor, which I might read, it does have some structure, some hidden structure. So, for example, that poem is very it's not apparent. I really hide this conceit, but it is about quantum mechanics. It's about particle wave duality, but the poem does not present itself that way. So if people read it, they can understand it even though they don't know anything about quantum physics. But that sort of, you're right that some kind of structure is important for me. In order for me to write a poem, I need to have either a conceit or something of the sort. Even when it is free verse, I need something to guide my hand. And that's what happened in that poem. for example.
Yeah, well, maybe we should read that one. It'll be interesting too. Being primed for it being about quantum mechanics. And the funny thing, when you have so many formal poems in a book, I assumed this was just a form that I didn't know. Like I was thinking maybe there's some, maybe this is like, the syllables are like pi, running out, or I don't know what. Right. But I assumed there was just something that I didn't recognize. So it's interesting to hear that. But it'll be interesting to hear that too, like your voice without the meter, which we haven't heard yet. So let's do that poem, At the Harbor.
Absolutely. I'll find that.
It's on page 74 if you're looking.
Perfect. Yes, I have it here. At the harbor. I'm still not sure it's you out there waving in my direction. The dock is full of people waiting. 2 women next to me talk about a remote revolution. The first of many to come, one says. And go, says the other. And while the first of them gestures, the other shakes her head. A child complains to his mother about the sudden smell of fish, but is soon transfixed by a seagull flapping its wings as it lands nearby. A man raises an eyebrow, and from the way his body shifts, I gather he's unhappy about the loud music booming through the earphones of a young man nodding along in solemn synchrony with the radio. I hear an improbable word, stardust. I flow back to the time you said, it's not true. We're not made of stardust, honey. It simply comes and goes like we do. How I came the closest to grasping what you meant when suddenly our kiss vanished. We're waves, you said. Waves.
Yeah, beautiful poem, At the Harbor. A sense of the free verse too, and free verse. I mean, you can hear free verse that is free verse and not just not not versed at all. Because you can feel the meter and just varying in those lines. Another beautiful poem from Pedro's newest book. And can you talk a little about that? The last line, of course, is the quantum mechanics. But how does the metaphor run through the poem? Let's talk about this a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a moment in the poem where the word stardust appears, and what was on my mind is this notion that people have that we are stardust, like every atom in our body is stardust. But the conception that the you in the poem has, the second person in the poem has, is different. It stems from the idea that even that stardust goes, right? The atoms that populate our body dissipate from our body and other atoms come into our body. We are really ebbing and flowing as entities in the world around us. So that was what was going on. And if you see the imagery in the poem, it really is filled with waves of one kind or another: smell, radio waves, etc. So the flapping of the wings is a wave movement. So all of that was behind the scenes, swept under the rug, as it were. But it was important to me.
And for a poem like that, how do those images, relating to the topic come about? Is it something that you had a concept for ahead of time, or was it in the process of writing or revision, where those ideas, all those different waves, and the concept of the poem came from? What's your writing process like when you sit down to write a poem?
That's excellent. So it's this one I wrote at the harbor. So I did write it there, and there are some poems that, for example, Under the Bedroom Skylight, the first one that I wrote under the bedroom skylight, and I noticed that my eyes were moving from left to right and right to left as I was looking at the stars, trying to fall asleep. It's a poem of insomnia, and that the eye movement suggested to me the conceit of writing palindromes or mirrors for the rhymes. So the rhyme scheme in that poem is palindromic words like doom rhymes with mood, for
Mm-hmm.
example, where the letters are exactly in reverse order. But that was because I was noticing something about the eye movements. I wanted to be truthful about my own experience. The poem, in some cases, it's not, it's not ostensibly truthful, but there's some truth, emotional truth that I am trying to convey. The design of the poem, I like to think that form looks for content and content looks for form.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for me to discern exactly what happens when, but sometimes I have an idea for content and I look for form, and then the form looks for other content, and all of that gets modified. And that's how the poem comes to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you had any of the palindrome poems on the list of poems you wanted to read, but there's a section of several palindrome poems toward the center of the book. Do you want to read any of those? Because I'd like to talk about that concept, the idea of writing in palindromes.
Sure. Yeah, I could read one of them. There is, I think, for example, Valentine's love poem could
Okay,
be.
and which page is that? So I can.
That is in page 46.
Okay. Yeah, I have it. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
You by me, my bed, a whole tone, cinema, same nice motel. Oh, wait by me, my buoy.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So then, of course, if you can look backward, you can see the you by me, my bed. So you can see the palindrome in there if you're watching on the YouTube, of course, or the Facebook or the Twitter, where we're all streaming. If you're listening, come find it. But you can see the palindrome there, and it's really interesting. I had a sort of a bit of a revelation thinking about the palindrome, because my first instinct was like, it's so arbitrary that these words happen to have the reverse order, the way we happen to spell them, the phonemes that happen to go to make these words go together. But then I realized that there's something arbitrary about just rhyme in general in the entire music of speech, And so it's really arbitrary that like Ham and Sam rhyme. There's no reason they should, and yet we might have a poem that does that. And so it's pulling the sort of music out of the arbitrary nature of reality or something, which is in a way like what human beings are all about or something. So I had it was late at night. I had a lot of deep thoughts reading this book on an airplane. But how is that? Like, what do you think? What is your sense of palindrome poetry as sort of pulling meaning out of randomness, which is kind of what on a really fundamental level, that's what it is. I think there was a comment Nate Jacob left somewhere. I don't know if I can find it fast enough to read. He said, yeah, both poetry and math attempt to make meaning out of what initially appears to be chaos. And there's a way that palindrome poems make meaning out of like total chaos. Like it's like so arbitrary what fits together in a palindrome, and yet we're pulling meaning out of it. So how do you think about the whole concept of writing poems as palindromes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think that well, palindromes are it's very easy for an obsessive person to get into them and not get out, which is a problem. But you're right. I think that the arbitrariness of the form or the stricture of the form is inviting for experimenting. I think that I am at heart an experimentalist when it comes to poetry. I like to experiment with what is definable, or in mathematics we say definable, but what is expressible? What can you express under certain strictures in language? The palindrome stricture is one of the hardest I know. It's extremely hard. And it's kind of miraculous that you can say sometimes something. On the other hand, I think that I also am inclined to study this issue of authorship. Like I think when I write a palindrome, I don't really feel that I am the author of the palindrome. I feel like I am discovering something like in the Platonic universe of forms, right? In the universe of mathematical truths as well. I am discovering something, and or if you think of it as writing, I am writing with a collaborator, and that collaborator is just language, and language in its conventional form in this moment. Because, for example, until the 1980s, the letter CH was a letter in the Spanish language, and now it's no longer a letter. So there's a lot of palindromes that are no longer palindromes. There's some conventions that form part of the process of the writing, and I like conceptually the idea of not being entirely the author, and giving some kind of negotiation goes on between me and language. I want to steer the poem in a certain direction, and language tells me, no, buddy, you gotta go this other way because it's more promising. That's what I like about it.
It's really interesting. I've always thought of, math as sort of the poetry, the sort of the cold poetry of the universe or something. It's like the poetry that exists without human beings adding their like limbic system on top of it. And did you have the sense, though? I've been thinking about this more lately with AI and large language models, and the way that like chess playing computers have discovered ways of playing chess and moves that we sort of just haven't thought of yet. And in the way that in a way, oops, I should have silenced my phone. Sorry about that. It's bad. Bad idea. But in the way that so all the possible poems in a way are already written, and we like almost haven't discovered them yet, which is what large language models sort of seem to tell us about poetry. That in the same way that there's a sort of finite number of chess moves, there's a finite number of poems that exist, and we're sort of unearthing them like a miner looking for a vein of gold or something, as opposed to the expression of my soul creating something out of nothing, which is a more traditional way of thinking about poetry, maybe. So do you have that feeling, like when you write a poem, not a palindrome poem, but a regular poem, do you have that feeling that you're unearthing something, or do you think that there's something different going on with language and poetry that's not the same as uncovering some mathematical formula?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot. The more strictures you have, the more it feels viscerally to me like what you're saying that AI is teaching us, which I believe is true. You can also conceive of writing a poem as a process of finding something in a Platonic universe. In fact, translation, I think of it as there's a poem, there's a Platonic version of the poem, and going from one representation of the poem to another is kind of like going through that Platonic realm. But I feel like the degrees of freedom are too large, so it just feels different psychologically to write a poem. It does feel to me like I have a lot of a lot of room for sculpting it, for sculpting the architecture of the poem. And so it feels very different to me. I must confess. So yeah, I've written some poems that are the more experimental side of things. I do involve a lot of extra structures that allow me to feel like I am not entirely the writer of the poem.
Yeah, it's fascinating you mentioned sculpture, because that's what I was thinking about the way sometimes when a poem comes to you, it feels like it must feel for Michelangelo or something to have this block of marble, and somehow like what you're about to carve is already in there, and you're just taking away, you're reducing the number of possibilities until you get to the one that was like in there the whole time, and so it's a taking away of options is the way of writing a poem in a strange way. And so yeah,
that I just wanted to say that I had an experience like that. I wrote 10 million palindromic sonnets in Spanish. And the way I did it is I wrote 10 versions of the first and last line, 10 versions of the second and penultimate, and so on. So there were 10 to the power 7 combinations of them, which is 10 million sonnets, which is similar to what Raymond Queneau, the French member of the Oulipo, did with his sonnets, poems, many poems. And I discovered that the original poem, the first one that I wrote, from which all of the others stemmed, was not the best version. So just by examining these 10 million sonnets, I realized that there was a better version. So yes, it's like you have this block of text, and and the choices that you make can be also you can also think of it as sculpting. You can also think of it as carving out possibilities and discarding stuff,
Yeah.
which is exactly how I love to think about poetry too.
Well, that's fascinating. I read some note about your 10 million your 10 million sonnets, and I was wondering how is that, like, because it's written as if it's a factual statement, and I assumed it must be somehow, and so it's great to have the explanation of that. Yeah, us go on. Let's do one of the poems we skipped. We skipped a couple to get to topical ones. Let's do "I Feel the Memory of Writing You," which was the one in Rattle, which is one of my favorite poems in the book. Maybe no coincidence. I love this one.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. I feel the memory of writing you. I feel the memory of writing you, beginning to carve out its riverbed deep in the shadow of my passing through. How after scanning you beneath, I flew a little lower. How I turned my head. I feel the memory of writing you, my labyrinthine road. I had no clue how to begin or end before I read, deep in the shadow of my passing through, the story I demanded to be true. In each one of the knots along the thread, I feel the memory of writing you. The moment when I felt your pulse, I knew, and as you slowly found your form, I shed deep in the shadow of my passing through a love song to the love song that you drew with words I'd say to words I hadn't said. I feel the memory of writing you deep in the shadow of my passing through.
Yeah, that's a beautiful villanelle from. I feel the memory of writing you from Nowhere at Home. And can you talk a little bit about the reason you called it Nowhere at Home? Where did that title come from?
That's a good question. So I um, I think that's a deep insight into me that I came about just by putting together the collection of poems and trying to find a title. There's um, a big variety of topics, of themes in the book. I feel like there's not as much unity as in the kind of collections that get published these days. Um, and I was born in Germany. I grew up in Guatemala. I am now an American citizen. Um, and I love formal poetry, but some of my favorite poems are in free verse. I am a logician, but I am a poet. There's a sort of like an anxiety, um, and a desire not to belong anywhere in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw that beautiful photograph that is on the cover, which is a photograph by my friend Arturo Godoy, a Guatemalan photographer, of a jaguar, and well, there's the footsteps of the jaguar, and then the title came to me, uh, and it was an instant of realization that there's a lot in the book that has that feeling of nowhere, not being at home anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Paul Mitchell Bernstein calls you a word matician, which is a great word. And it does. It makes a lot of sense. What has been how do you keep those sort of compartments? How do they fit together? Like, do people that work with you in the mathematics department, do they think it's strange that you do poetry on the side? Is that something that they're proud of, that they have a poet in the department?
Yeah, they're very supportive. They're supportive. I'm lucky to have a very supportive department. Um, but yeah, it's strange. There's no denying that. It is a strange affectation for a mathematician to do
Yeah.
poetry.
Well, I think there's too little of that. Too little of people that aren't English majors focusing on teaching English and teaching creative writing. I mean, we need people writing poems from all walks of life, as the original description of Rattle said, and I think it's just true. I mean, we want poets everywhere because poetry is everywhere and humanity is everywhere, and poetry is what it means to be human. If anybody has any questions for Pedro, please leave them in the chat windows either on Facebook or YouTube. I'll try to peek at Twitter too now that we're streaming on X again. But if you have any questions, please leave them and I'll pass them along. But let's hear another poem, Pedro. What do you want to read next?
I guess I could read the last poem in the book, which is called A Doomsday Prayer for the Polluting Ape. It's on page 76. Look at my brethren gathering today in airport transit rooms. They wander by as if untangling dreams, aflame but grey from noctilucent broom, a burnished lie. Behold, fair muse, a bright awakening. Valises hobbling forth, untiring hands filling out trifling papers, fidgeting. Disorder beauty never understands. Regard meek faces pondering regret. Others upbeat and searching for some plain, others absorbed in labor, others yet deciphering abstruse passages in vain. Despite noise, carbon footprint, air pollution, accord them bitter hope for absolution.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sonnet there. And then if you look at the next page, I'll read the note. A doomsday prayer, and I don't think anybody would have guessed this, but a doomsday prayer for the polluting ape is built from the 3-letter International Air Traffic Association codes for airports. A different way of reading the poem is as a 988,715 miles long itinerary involving 132 airports. So if you don't believe me, that the title A Doomsday Prayer for the Polluting Ape is right here, going from Andamuka, Australia, ADO, to Amsk Oblast, Russia, OMS, a dooms, and then Dayton, Ohio for day. And the entire poem goes through that way, a journey through airport 3-letter codes. So tell me about this poem. It was very surreal, I have to say, to read this. I came upon this poem while sitting at the airport waiting for my plane to start boarding. And so I started looking around, like it was like the universe was writing me a poem in the back of the book. So how did this poem come to be? Where did the idea come from, and how difficult was it to come up with these, constructing 3 letters at a time, a whole sonnet?
Yeah, so it came to be because I had read a book by Chris Kerr, in which it's called Nam Gal Sips Clark, that book, and in it he uses only he allows himself only to use chemical symbols for elements to write text. So there are words that are prohibited because you can't put them together with the chemical symbols of elements. And that's what gave me the idea to do that in general, not just with IATA codes, but with 2-letter abbreviations of languages, 2-letter abbreviations of country codes, all sorts of different codes, and gave me the idea of writing enciphered sonnets, which I wrote in Spanish originally. So there's a Spanish version of this poem.
Oh, wow.
But it's not as long. It's just 1,000,000 kilometers long. So it's a little less long because there's so many more monosyllabic words in English. So this one is longer. And I had to give and take. So there's some archaic sounding syntax, like there's some stuff that I wouldn't ever write in a poem that I wrote myself, like brethren, words like so. But collaborating with the airports, this is what I came up with.
Well, yeah, it's just fascinating. And then you have another one, which maybe we'll get to based on the genome in a similar way, the cat genome in particular.
Yeah.
But for now, we had a question from I think it was Nate Jacob over on Facebook. Yeah, he wanted to hear some of your poetry, more a request than a question, but he wondered if he could hear some of your poetry read in Spanish. And we do have bilingual sonnet, which might be perfect for
That's right.
that as a segue. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is you can think of it as a bilingual poet uh, in a straitjacket, trying to make sense of the world. Bilingual sonnet. Trae hoy alpina cima el dios traidor, ese sumo detalle veride. Se mostró sin rubor de plata, fe es por creer final posee su honor. Y de demostrar obra, hielo raro, fe es por Dios reventeo pasé día solo, rapero loco, todo por Apolo, lo paro, podo, toco, lo reparo. Loss aids a poet? Never, so I drop. See, for a role I harbor art, some deed, iron no sea, so plan I freer crop. See fatal Pedro burn, I sort some seed, I revel late. Do muses erode art? So idle am I. Can I play, O heart?
Yeah, it's a wonderful poem, bilingual sonnet, again from Nowhere at Home, Pedro Poitevin's newest book from Penteract Press. And I wanted to ask too, being a bilingual poet and a formalist as well, what is the difference in trying to write formal poetry in Spanish as opposed to in English? English is sort of such a rougher language with so many different sounds, and the order of operations is more important, because of where the English continent or island was, how many times it was invaded, and all of that history. What's the difference between writing and how do you compare the two?
My goodness, I am two very different, strikingly different poets. In English, I am more reticent than in Spanish. I feel more at home in Spanish, unfortunately. I have lots of insecurities as somebody who is not natively bilingual when I write in English. I think that it's very different to write in English and in Spanish. When I wrote I Feel the Memory of Writing You, the first thing I thought is, I'm not going to write anything again in English. This is too good. I'm not going to improve on this. But yeah, so it's very different. And the culture, the Pobis culture is also different, I think, in general. So it's completely a different vibe. I don't know what else to say. It's just so different.
What is that? What is that different vibe? I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, I think that the different cultures value different things at different moments in time, and in Spanish, for some reason, this formal games that I play and that I've sometimes not played, but sometimes I do play. They're a little bit better received in general than in English.
Yeah.
Somehow, I also feel like Spanish has it's a little bit easier to write for me to write well in Spanish than in English, but the compression, the proliferation of monosyllabic words in English makes it has some advantages for writing formal poems, specifically sonnets. I feel like the sonnet is a form that can be really, really tightly filled in with English. So you can write very good sonnets in English. I love Keats, for example.
One of the things that I noticed, which might not be true, but it's just a sort of a little hunch I get reading, poems, translated from the Spanish, because I'm sadly, a one language person. But it feels like English language poetry is a lot more often rooted in sort of time and space, and there's more of a timelessness to Spanish poetry. Do you feel that's the case, or is that just my imagination? It feels like sort of, and I maybe add it to the sort of the briefness of sort of America as a country, the United States. How we don't have as much history as other places, maybe, or maybe the materialism, we're like rooted in the tangible moment. But it feels like there's sort of a sense of spanning time and reaching more over time in Spanish language poetry. Did you get a sense of that, or is that just my imagination?
I haven't gotten that sense, but I think that probably you are likely to get that sense from the fact that the things that make it from one culture to another tend to be the more timeless things. They tend to be, I think it's harder to translate a poem that is very, tightly related to local conditions or local. It's harder for people to translate those poems.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's see. Well, let's hear another poem. I want to make sure we get through, and we have. Why don't we do as my three children tidy up their rooms, which is another fascinating an anagrammatic poem. And so explain what this is, and I'll play the video. We'll figure out how to read it while we're playing the video too. But explain what this poem is.
Yeah, so I actually wrote this while my children were tidying up their rooms. So that's half true. I wrote a sonnet. So there's two texts. The first text is just a paragraph. It's just a prose poem, if you will. And it sets the scene. It explains what is going on. It ends with the words of sorts, which I like because it's about sorting the letters afterwards. And the second sonnet, the second part of the poem, is a rectangular sonnet. So it looks like a rectangle. It has the same number of characters in each line. It's self-descriptive, self-enumerating, and in some sense, it's truthful. Everything it says is true. And I wanted to write that sonnet before my kids finished tidying up the rooms.
Wait a minute. Did you really did this anagram you pulled off in the time it took your kids to clean their room?
No, just the sonnet. Just the sonnet. The anagram took me a couple of days longer.
Okay. Because that'd just be too much. I don't know if I'd believe
And
it.
the version that I had was it used the word sour, and my youngest, the one who has 19 stuffed foxes, that's actually true, that there are 19 stuffed foxes in his room. He did not like the word sour to describe him. So I had to fiddle around with the poem, the prose part, and it ended up significantly better thanks to him. So he's a good editor. All right, so I can read it. I'll read the first part first. As my three children tidy up their rooms. My sons, Daniel, Julian, and Gabriel, resident sportsmen, daze through sorry rooms while I write a stern, strict paragraph. One of them stutters, protests injustice. Another struts testily. The third pets our 19 stuffed foxes. It's easier to find warm coffee than mild peace. I kick a bad ball, ever peeved. Quick, I strain to see the end of this before they're done. They attempt to fit in unusual stuff. A cactus? Really? Such a stormy view from orbit on high. I see abstruse structures, unmade beds, and avidly stretched toward the even sonnet, a tactical cannon of sorts. As my three children tidy up the rooms. This sonnet has been crafted to comprise 560 characters precisely, but filler as its ink may be, surprise, it fits its witty argument quite nicely. 455 letters a loom, 105 non-letters in between. It sings about the structure of its room, and even as it does so, paints a scene. 4 sentences that gather dust to gel, 4 stanzas that would rather be apart, strain as a service crew at some hotel to pick up the debris and make it smart. 100 words come joyfully together to admire the sonnet's cap and feather.
That is, I don't know how you did that. What is it like to write an anagrammatic poem? Do you do like is like a draft? Like you have like I have this number and I'm gonna pick. I need my 3 B's right now or whatever. How do you go about writing an anagram as a poem?
Oh my gosh, it's really hard. Really hard. The first time I tried it was because I wanted to write 2 sonnets that were palindromes and anagrams, and I succeeded, and then I learned a lot doing that. But it was really hard, and this one took me a good 2 days really to clinch.
Just two
Because
days.
yeah.
But what do you do? Like, is there a process to these kind of poems that you have? Like,
Yes, yes, there is a process. The first thing that you do is, of course, you wanna tell the truth as much as you can. Especially in this sonnet, I knew that I wanted to set the scene for the second one. And so you look for words, and you write a first version, and you're gonna check the distribution of letters, and you realize that you're overusing letters that are not in the sonnet, or underusing letters that are in the sonnet. And then you start looking for words that have a high concentration of the letters that you are using a lot of in the other piece of text. Because in this case, I wasn't going to change the sonnet. The sonnet had to be the way it was.
mm-hmm.
So the initial text had to adjust itself to the sonnet.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm looking at the YouTube comments, and there's just disbelief. It's what that you could do. I mean, all these things that you do. How much of your daily life is devoted to poetry? Because I assume you have to do other things for your day job. How
Yeah.
much do you set aside a certain amount of time every day, or just when the mood strikes you? It's like on vacation, you sit down and write a palindrome poem. How do you find time for poetry?
Yeah, I don't. I don't. I find time every once in a while. So, for example, um, the sonnet I wrote while my kids were occupied, and then the anagram, it took me some work, but it's always like Twitter time. Like you have 140 characters to interact with the poem. Right? You have a very limited amount of time because you have to go cook and you have to do some math and so on. So it's hard.
Well, we're coming up on time. I think we should do 2 more poems, but we have 3 more to choose from. What do you want to read next? And we'll do a few questions, and then one last poem.
Sure. I could read. I don't remember. Oh, the cat genome. Why not?
Okay.
That's page 23, I believe.
Yeah, I was
So
wondering
this
how
is
you would read this, so that's very interesting too.
yeah, I can explain a little bit. It's a bilingual poem as well. It combines the iambic pentameter meter of the English language with hendecasyllabic meter, the classical hendecasyllabic meter of Spanish. It's written in the smallest alphabet necessary for writing the 2 sequences of letters that I cared about, which are CAT and GATA, which mean cat in Spanish and English, of course. And I found this on it. It's not written by me. So it's written by Mother Nature in the genome of Cinnamon, an Abyssinian cat. So I just found sonnet in a genome. And I was a biochemistry major, so I that's why I ended up looking in cat genomes. C C T T T G A T T G G A T C A T T T A G T C G A T T T A C A T T C A G A G T A A T T A T T G A T T A G G T A T A T A T T T A G T G C C A T T C T A C T A G T T G G T T T G C C A T T G T T T C T T G A T G T T T T C T C T G A T C C T T T T C T T G T C T G T A C A C T T T T G G T C C T T C A T T.
That was a cat genome. And if you, for those just listening, where it's CAT comes up, it's bolded so you can see the cat, and the gata too for cat written in there in the code within the sonnet. Just a fascinating way to go about it. And it does bring up a question, though, which a few people have asked sort of variations of this in the chat. But we think of poetry as a way to discover meaning. You know, it's the way to find the things that you didn't know you knew. You know, it's that the connection between the right and left hemispheres. It's the spark of understanding, leaping the gaps of knowledge. I mean, there's all those ways you can talk about it. But it's always like in search of some kind of like truth or reality that's like we didn't quite have a way to articulate. And how does all of this experimental play that you do affect your truth-seeking within a poem? Is it a way, do you find that these sort of exercises that you go through unlock meaning that you didn't know you knew? Is that just part of your process? Or is it more a play with language where you're having fun? How does that affect the truth of a poem?
Yeah. So in this case, I think of it as a conceptual poem, and it is the architecture of the concept that really hits it home emotionally for me. I was a biochemistry major in Guatemala, and so I find myself in the years later here in the United States, learning to program in a suitable language to enter into genomes and find sonnets in the genome of an animal, in this case a cat, because I love cats. Mm-hmm. And I find one, and it turns out that it mixes the two poetic traditions that I love the most, and that it does so in a very tight manner, because the only letters that are available in this alphabet that I have in my hands are sufficient for spelling those two words. And it ties in with my past and with my nowhere at homeness, right? Like this sense of migrating from one poetic tradition to another, migrating from one country to another, and yet it connects me to my past self in some ways, and it connects the two poetic traditions that I love in some way. And it rescues my love for a cat. I have a cat that I love.
Yeah, I just interesting. You know, the way playing with words does all that. You know, it's fascinating. Where do you think? How does poetry make your life better? Like, and at the end of the day, like, why do you do this? I mean, this book, it's not going to be a bestseller that makes money or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And why go about poetry? What do you get out of it as a human being?
I think that you can get insight into yourself. And in my case, I feel like I do. I get insight into my own experience as a human being. For instance, the last poem that I think I will read is one that illustrates that. And it's called Self-Portrait as a Dog Out Walking. And I wrote it after walking with my dog. And it just, in this poem, life is the conceit. The conceit is life is the hand that that has its leash on me, or death in the eyes of other, in a different way of looking at things. But I gained that insight by writing the poem, and I feel like my life is better for it.
And one last question, and then we'll read that poem. But do you think that everybody should be a poet? That's one of the things that sometimes I get some pushback on. I try to say that that everybody has a poem inside them, and they're finding ways to get that out, maybe. But all children are poets, and then we get a little self-conscious and stop doing it. But to me, it feels like everybody. It's the kind of thing that it's good for your mind and your soul in the same way exercise is good for your body. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like there's a calling? Because there's nothing wrong with that opinion too. That poetry is a calling, and we're drawn to something, and poets are a special breed of human being. But do you think? Would you encourage everybody to be a poet?
Um, I don't feel qualified to really make a recommendation about everybody, but I do feel that there is some truth to the fact to the idea that poetry can be, for some people, um, a way of practicing what I think it's Maturana and Varela, the Chilean philosophers, called autopoiesis, like honing the art of making yourself as you go in life in a poetic way, living your life in a poetic way. So, and that's how I deal with it.
Yeah. Well, we're all glad you do. That's for sure. Well, let's finish out with this last poem, Self-Portrait as a Dog Out Walking.
Unbelievable hand that gives my soul this gentle bit of slack during our stroll. Will you release me, grab the ball and throw it? I'd splash about and fetch it like a poet. Beloved hand that takes me to the hill to shed my vanity and train my will, take pity and allow that other mutt to come to me this once and smell my butt. Then take me to your nightly game of chess. I promise to stay still and nibble less, and wake up when you're ready to head home, and walk right next to you and let you roam. Even if hounds smell death and bark the reaper, I'll lick you lovingly, my life, my keeper.
That's great. Self-Portrait as a Dog Out Walking, and could be an Ars Poetica fitting right in with the topic we were just talking about. That is the last poem we're going to share from Nowhere at Home, the wonderful book by Pedro Poitevin from Penteract Press. Hope everybody can check it out. Thanks so much, Pedro, for being a guest. It's just been so fun talking to you about poetry and math and all things valuable. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Tim.
Yep. Have a great night.
You too.
That was Pedro Poitevin once again. You can find more from penteractpress.com. And let me show that on the screen. Penteract Press. Is it on here? There it is. It's PNTERACT press.com. So find the book there. That is Nowhere at Home by Pedro Poitevin. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our open lines. And as always, the open lines can be anything you want to share. You can share the prompt poem for this week, which was to write a poem in which someone gets their hands dirty. Or you can share poems about current events. You can share poems you've written recently, that you've published recently, anything you'd like to share for the open lines. We'll spend about an hour doing that. I'm going to put the Zoom link in the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching on X, find Facebook or YouTube. I'm not going to post it there because that seems like kind of inviting trolls. But we'll post that in to Facebook and YouTube right now. And before you join, though, let me put this on the screen too. Email your poem to openmic, that's openmic@rattle.com. You can also submit it to our new Prompt Poem of the Month feature. So either way, make sure I have it so I can show it on the screen. Either have it submitted through Submittable to Rattle's Prompt Poem of the Month, or email it right now to openmic, that's openmic@rattle.com. And I'll be right back with more poetry, so sit tight right where you are. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Now, the prompt for this week was to, here we go. Oops, here we go. Where'd it go? There it is. Pick a single word at random from the dictionary and use that as the title of a poem in which someone gets their hands dirty. And of course, that prompt poem is from Katie Dozier, our prompt series editor. Let's go to Katie and see what she had first and talk about this prompt. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I love the interview. It was a fascinating discussion. It makes me also wish I was better at math because I want to appreciate on the same level. I think I've got a ways to go before that happens for me. But
I don't know. As a professional poker player in the past life, I think you have a pretty good grasp of math. But
I have a good grasp of that kind of math. That kind of math I did have to wrap my head around. But
So this was the prompt this week, which was based on last week's poem or poet, Jane Clark. What was your experience? You wrote a poem yourself. What was your experience writing it this week?
I thought it was kind of a dangerous prompt because I felt like I could have written like a ton of poems on this. I mean, how fun is it to pick a random word? Like every word deserves a poem, right?
It really does.
Almost.
It's almost like there's one great book that's like what is it? I'm trying to remember. There's one book that's like a dictionary with like fake definitions. And it's a book of poetry, like prose poems. It's great. I can't think of it right now. Someone in the chat probably will. But yeah, that definitely every word deserves a poem. What was the word that you came up with?
Pareidolia is the word that I hit upon. So.
And that what does that mean?
I don't want to say it before the poem. The whole point of the poem is what it means.
Okay, well let's hear the poem, then I'll put it up on screen.
Hopefully, at least. I feel like if you still need a definition after the poem, then maybe I didn't do a great job. We'll see. Okay. Pareidolia. Of course, we all see shapes strung up in the clouds. A bunny leaps from cotton. We repaint brushstrokes, build entire mountains. When I dig my nails into the truth, each twig draws a new square root, just another planted memory, watching someone else's hands grow cold in this span of dirt. An oak is both a tree and tomorrow's absentee. The bunny leapfrogs from the clouds and hops into a hat, winks. Did I just imagine or did I conjure that?
Yeah, that was excellent. Pareidolia, which I think people can probably guess what it means based on the poem. That's probably true. But for those it's the recognition of patterns in things where the meaning doesn't exist. So the face on Mars, the Jesus in toast, the consciousness in ChatGPT, all of them kinds of pareidolia.
I put forth that the bunny we see in the sky is just as real as the bunny we see on the ground.
It could be. So and then it was running toward the ending too, which to me was made the poems kind of easy because you could you knew where you were going, a little trajectory.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. And Katie and I do the Poetry Space also on Twitter or X. And this week on the Poetry Space, we're talking about meter. Maybe we can get Pedro to come on too. We'll see if he wants to join on Thursday. That's 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be talking about meter, which is a fun topic. I mean, as you know, I love formal poetry and wish there was more. So it'll be fun to talk about that and what you've learned over the week exploring meter.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that because I actually took this poem and broke it down into scanning it for beats as practice for the space on Thursday. And it actually helped me edit it, which is interesting.
It is. It's very interesting. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Katie. It's always a pleasure, and we'll reveal next week's prompt at the end of the open lines. But thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
Right, see you later.
Bye.
It was Katie Dozier with Pareidolia. And now my poems for the week were, let's see, let me find them. So I actually had two because I in a way I failed in both poems because we're supposed to have a single word as the title, which was randomly found in the dictionary. In the first poem I wrote, actually the second poem I wrote, that didn't work as the title. I needed to change it. And then then I tried again, and I had the end of it didn't end up with dirt in your hands either. So these are both failed poems, both trying 2 attempts at the prompt for this week. And I'll read them both. It's a sonnet and a little haibun, so I'll read them both because they're short. But anyway, here we go with this. The first one, originally the title was just algorithm. That was the word I pointed at the dictionary. And it was next to some word that I didn't use, to be fair. It was like the biggest, most interesting word near where my finger landed. And then I changed it, though, because it needs this title to make more sense and be more accessible. It's arguing online feels more and more like talking to an algorithm. What I really wanted was to follow one home, to trace my way through fiber wires and microwaves to find a seam or hollow node in the network, to feel the fires of an idea swirl into a bodied being. I'd track it down the laminated halls of light. It wouldn't know if it was fleeing on foot or if its shoulder brushed the walls, for what were feet and what was knowing. Yards behind, I'd watch it hug the passing lane as if the empty road were full of cars. The houses on its streets would look the same. Out back, a garden full of thoughts and dirt. Tomorrow's talking points wiped on its shirt. That is a sonnet. Arguing online feels more and more like talking to an algorithm, and it definitely does. And then since that was actually my second attempt, I put them out of order. My first one was nuptial, which came, we were in an art gallery, and there was a piece, there was art written in black and white on a dictionary page. And so this is a word from that page. And it was nuptial. And this is the hyben that came from that, in which originally it ended with a haiku about hands and dirt. But then I made a better haiku. There's no dirt anymore. So here we go with nuptial. The problem with summer, it's tiring. You feel like an ooze flowing through ooze. It's okay. Just lie under the fan, half naked, waiting for midnight. When the calendar turns and the moon takes its slice of the air, we're all one day closer to fall. Holding our breath through the heat wave. Pool toys. That is nuptial, hyben. And that are my two. Sorry for sharing two, a little self-indulgent, but if I didn't, I would cheat and do this one for next week, the sonnet. And so I thought I'd share them both to keep myself on task. Now let's go to some more open lines. We have a whole bunch of people on, so let's do it. Two if they're really short like that, one if they're not. And Carla Schwartz is up first. We have some first-time callers too, so excited to see who we've got. Hey, Carla, how are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. I just got back from being out on the lake, and yeah, I'm doing well.
How's the summer treating you? Is it hot up there in your northeast too, or is it not as
I'm
bad?
in the northeast on Lake Winnipesaukee today. It was a perfect day. It was in the 70s, sunny, gorgeous.
Well, don't tell me that, because I'm here in the mountains of Southern California, and I don't know if everybody could hear the whole episode. My computer tower has been like just droning on with a fan, and I'm like praying that it doesn't like melt, because it's like 95 degrees outside, and I have no air conditioning.
I'm sorry.
I wish I was out on the lake.
All right. Well, here I go. I'm going to I don't have, maybe I'll come back around for a second poem, but I don't think so right now. Okay. So this is my prompt poem, which, by the way, I'll just say to you, Tim, you wrote a prompt poem because that prompt prompted you to write that poem.
That is true. They both count. It doesn't matter what it comes,
right.
As long as it generates a poem, we're all happy. That is a great point, Carla. Thanks.
Exactly. Okay. And the word I chose at random from actually a random word generator, because I didn't feel like going through an actual page dictionary, which I don't have, is attitude. 6 degrees of I know Kevin Bacon. He's on my Instagram. He sings, he dances, he shows up in my dream. He showed up in my dream last night. We connected on black beans, bicycles, the Mount Washington tour boat running aground. Also in the dream, my father, who observed the conversation patiently without saying a word. Connection is just attitude. The mixing of auras was not addressed. The heat in the room, not addressed. That Kevin's married happily in my dream, not addressed. My attitude, not that kind of connection. Not at this point in my life. You will not find me singing to goats. Well, you might, but I would not live with them, pawing the dirt, then pawing me.
Oh, that is great. And writing toward that ending, digging in the dirt too. But I love the not addressed little run at the end of that. The ending is terrific. Thanks for sharing that, Carla.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yep. Take care. Attitude
Yep.
by Carla Schwartz. Thanks, Carla. Next up is a first-time caller, J. Yair Broadbar.
Yeah, I'm a total newbie, and so I actually didn't realize that the prompt was for this, and I also my last dictionary fell apart, and I never replaced it, so I also used a random word generator. But that's not what I thought I would share, so I don't know if we have to wait for later. But it was
No, you can share anything you'd like. So it is open. It's truly open lines, an open mic. So
well, I
we have the
sent you
prompts to inspire people, but
Okay.
but if you have other stuff, feel free.
Oh no, I sent you the I had emailed you per your request. So, but it's a poet's response. So it's a prompt based on a poet's response from earlier this summer of a poem called "Let's Kiss." So, do you want me just to read it?
Yeah, go ahead. I have it up for everybody watching on the streams. Yeah, go ahead. Let's kiss.
Okay, great. Let's kiss after Angelica Whitehorn. Let's kiss, our fiddle, burn, baby, burn. I wave from the berm, knowing your kids will live submerged. Let's kiss. A big fuck off, all is NIMBY, can't be bothered. Look away as I step casually over a carcass sleeping bag. And yes, sometimes hold my nose. Not even a sorry, got no change. Let's kiss. My two palatial homes, one boat, and Bali vacations, my factory running off toxins for years. So sad. Hey, you can blow me. Kiss. Let's.
That's great. Excellent response to Angelica Whitehorn's poem, Let's Kiss. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, and once again, that was Jay Broadbar. Good to see Jay, always great to see a first-time caller. Let's go to Nivedita Karthik next. And Nivedita is on her way to work, so we want to get Nivi in before she has to run. Nivi, are you there?
Great. How are you doing? I'm doing good, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So what do you have to share?
I think like most people, I just went to a random word generator because I don't have a hard copy of the dictionary here at home, sadly.
Yeah, well, the truth is my algorithm one was a random word generator too. It's just the way to go about it, you know? I mean, we're modern folk here in the...
And the first word that popped up when I searched was lavender. And I thought that was a brilliant juxtaposition because I think the color lavender or the flower lavender sort of means like, I know, like elegance and things like that. And then you sort of have to contradict that with getting your hands dirty. So I don't know if I managed to do it, but this is what I came up with.
Well, that's perfect. Okay, let's hear it.
Lavender. Sunset spills over. A lavender haze. Pretty weeds blossom. Butterfly wings stir up a hurricane, chasing away fallen leaves, burying memories. Down in the dirt, fingers desperately search elusive dreams.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, I love that lavender. Sunset spills over lavender haze. Yeah, beautiful poem. Thanks so much for sharing that, Nivi.
Thank you, Tim. Have a lovely evening.
Yep, you too. Have a good day at work.
Thank you.
There's a Nivi Karthik with lavender. And next, let's go to another first-time caller, I think. Sangeeta Kalarikal is here. Oops, not Laura. Yeah, there you go. Hey, Sangeeta, how you doing?
Hi, I am not first time.
No, okay. Well,
but I am a
rare
second
caller,
time.
second-time caller. Well, that's great. We love second-timers too. So, what do you have to share with us?
I sent you my latest Haibun. I don't know if you got it.
I do. Yeah, I have it
Summiting.
right here. Summiting. And we love Haibun, obviously, here on the Rattlecast.
I missed the conference, Tim.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I was impressed just with how good the haiku poetry community is. I mean, just wonderful, poems all around. So if anybody can get to the Haiku North America in 2 years in San Francisco, definitely put that on your calendar.
It's on, it's on. So this one was published in Haiku Katha
Uh-huh.
in August. Haiku Katha is a comparatively new journal from India. So it's got really good stuff. You
Oh, that's
must read
great.
it if you don't. Yeah. But before I start, can I make a quick plug for something?
Oh, yeah, sure. Please
It's
do.
an event on this Saturday
Mm-hmm.
coming up. It's called Poetry Marathon. I don't know if you've heard of it, where 24 hours you have once every hour you would write a poem.
Mm-hmm.
And the community has grown so much that we have hundreds of poets writing at the same time on second, starting at 8 a.m. I think Eastern time or something like that,
Yeah, that's interesting.
and
So
going on for 20.
where would people find that? How would they participate?
I can send it to your Facebook if that's okay with you, and maybe you can share it. So
Yeah,
you
we
have to
can put it-
register,
yeah.
but yeah,
We'll put it in the chat
Yeah.
in the YouTube stream. Makes me think of the
I'll do that.
that what was it called? The Noosphere project at Princeton that measured randomness, and everybody meditating on one thing at a time made the world less random somehow in this weird experiment that they did there. So you're actually, this poetry marathon is going to be affecting the actual world. It's really interesting.
Possible, but I have to tell you, I found a whole bunch of poets over just participating in that. Just it's awesome.
Yeah.
So, without wasting too much time, here's summiting.
Great, go ahead.
Darkness shrouds us. Flashlight prove useless on the mountain route to Lohagarh. We'll just wait until the clouds move a little and more stars appear. Whitey's voice reaches the trailing member of the group. We all stop, puffing and panting. Edges of leaves brown before the first florets bloom. We squint and try to discern the shapes of trees, bushes, boulders. A twinkle appears, then another, and within a few seconds, a large rally of light points. We stand agape, our urban hearts pound loud. Perhaps when clouds are so dense, the stars descend on the earth. Spring equinox, the slight pause before a crocus. Whitey returns from his quick walk ahead, his palms cupped. Come, see my fist light up. We huddle around him as he loosens his fingers enough to show his glowing fist. We let out a collective gasp. And then, in a moment, as he opens his palms, drops his arm to his side, and the firefly takes off, glowing now off, now on. New destinations, what fallen leaves leave behind.
Oh, that's beautiful. Excellent, Hyman. Summiting by Sangeeta
Thank
Kalarickal. Thanks so much for sharing that. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
And then, before you leave, put that Zoom link in, or put that link to the marathon in the Zoom chat.
Yeah.
And then we'll move it over to the YouTube and stuff. Then everybody can get it. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing both of those things. That was great. Summiting.
Thank you.
Once again.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay, and let's go next to Kimberly. Kimberly McNeil, that is. Hey, Kimberly, it's been a bit. How you doing?
Hey, Tim.
Yeah, great to see you.
It's good to see you, too.
So what do you have you'd like to share?
I hope you got them in word form.
I have mathematical consciousness.
Okay. I also wanted to read Caveman.
Caveman. Okay, let me pull that up too. Do you want to do that first, Caveman?
Sure.
Okay, let me pull it up and explain what we're getting into right now.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Caveman. I just sometimes when I'm reading poetry, I feel like people aren't being honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I think truth is possibly the most important ingredient. in poetry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it feels like what I'm doing is almost like a lie detector when I read submissions. It's just like, is there some grain of truth here? And then that's a good poem. Sometimes it seems that simple.
Yeah. So I just felt like writing a very honest poem.
Okay. And that's Caveman. So go ahead whenever you're ready. Yeah.
I need a caveman. Someone brave enough to drag me around by my hair. A butler who can mix a drink and pack my bags for Paris. A carnivorous, pro-gluten guy who can cook and clean. An ex-junkie who can roll a joint and wake and bake with me. A recovering Catholic casualty. My open-minded confidant. An unassuming sexual beast. The uncouth man who will devour me.
That's great. I definitely feel the honesty there. Thanks so much for sharing that, Kimberly. And then you had another poem too, that was the mathematical one. Let me go back to that and then explain what this is, Sue. It's very short, but explain what it is.
Well, I was just thinking about math and poetry with our guests today, and I kind of flipped back through and I found it. I hadn't read it in a couple of years. Let me pull it up here.
Okay.
Let's see. So I am in Colorado trying to get home to Sarasota, and we've got the hurricane heading for us.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I'm kind of worried about that. Sorry it's taken me so long.
Oh, it's all right.
I want to find my links. Oh, here we go. Stand by.
Okay. Well, I've got it up for everybody at home already, so we're ready whenever you are.
Okay. Okay. Mathematical consciousness. Consciousness equals awareness of perceived surroundings over time, where consciousness, or C, equals awareness, or A, times perceived surroundings times age, which is T, divided by brainwash, bigotry, greed, and concreteness. And you get a score. The denominator could simply be organized religion.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Kimberly. That was a mathematical consciousness, a mathematical formula for consciousness. Speaking of mathematical formulas, and very interesting. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Yep, take care. And stay safe with that hurricane.
Okay, will do.
Okay, bye. It's Kimberly Canino with 2 poems. And next we shall go to, trying to do a different order than we usually do. Mark Grenier. Let's go to Mark Grenier next. I think certain people are quicker on the button, and we're going in reverse order this week of button quickness. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Hi, Tim. Pretty good. I actually tried the prompt poem this week, except I didn't use a dictionary either. I have a word a day program, and I just grabbed the word of the day.
Ah, interesting. And so what was the word of the day?
The word of the day is fraudistery.
Oh, I've never heard that word. So
I never heard it either. And it's a place for thinking.
Interesting. Okay.
And here's the poem. Oh, what a heavy book this is. Like the porcelain pedestal on which I like to sit and ship while contemplating the universe, or looking up at last, that word I couldn't forget, from another poem I don't comprehend, another magnificent word with which to dirty my two poetic hands, where odes compelled by purple angst into twilight skies and infernoed Pacific breaks must crash and burn, where ash smokes down on heads and hands of those who weren't trying to escape providential electric lines. Grounded near those who failed to escape, who were living in an island paradise like unrepentant Luddites, and are now beat down, begrimed and bedraggled by smoke and ash, with burnt and blistered hands from firebrands falling into their heads, onto this open dictionary, this frontistery, abandoned now, the gates of paradise.
Yeah, another poem with a great ending, and I love that word, frontistery. I'm going to have to start using that more often. I'm about to go to my frontistery. I'll see you later. Sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. There was Mark Grenier with frontistery. Yeah, that's a great word, and important poem too, with the events of the news in the last week. Next, let's go to Nate Jacob.
Hey, good evening.
Hey, Nate, what's up?
I'm having a great time. That was an amazing interview tonight.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to that for a while. Pedro was one of those enigmas that I was really looking forward to getting to know better. You are another enigma.
Well, hey, I wrote a prompt poem.
Excellent.
From an actual dictionary.
Ooh, real dictionary, real paper cuts cover, and everything.
Little tape on the cover to keep it together. I use the word literal, not the word literal as we normally know it, but littoral, which is of or relating to the shore of a lake, sea, or ocean.
Another word. That is a word I knew, actually.
What?
Yeah.
I know where I go. I also wrote a American sonnet. It neither rhymes nor did I pay attention to meter, but there are 14 lines.
Perfectly patriotic. Thanks so much, Nate, for sharing that.
All right. Literal. Low tide rain rising up from the fish scale sand, and me again, reminding my waiting young daughter that hearts are most easy when drawn top down, and true love requires an arrow to pierce it. This is the reach of the sea where we first sensed the rise and fall, the back and forth, the scroll of our lives cutting clean through driftwood rings that marked time's escape, marked us as its own. We would have stayed suspended there forever, like kites from her sand-caked hands, curled too tight until wet, gritty strings knocked deep her tender palms, while the rush of the surf pushed us further upshore, the hidden sun pressing down and pushing back and back, time ticking too soon through our own wounded hands.
Oh, that's a beautiful poem, Littoral by Nate Jacob. Thanks so much, Nate. That was just beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Great show. Thanks again.
Yeah, Nate Jacob with Littoral. And let's go next to Rob Harris. Yep. There you go, Rob. Hey, Rob.
How are you?
Yeah, good to see you.
Thanks. I actually, this week's poem was kind of a interesting one for me because I submitted it a few minutes ago for Poets Respond this week, but by the time that gets read, it's not going to be applicable anymore. It's so fresh, it just demands to be heard right now. So it's called Target Sunshine State.
Interesting.
It's
okay, yeah.
haiku.
Yeah, here we go.
Actually, it has to do with the Hurricane Idalia that's bearing down on Florida. And I don't know if Kimberly's still listening from a few ago, but I heard about the storm this morning. It seems like Florida doesn't really need another hurricane, but here it comes anyway.
For sure. Who does? Is it going to be a bad one? I've seen a little bit of news about it, but very little. Is it going to be rough?
Category 3 by the time it makes landfall. It's going to hit in the middle of the state and basically cross right through Jacksonville, where the shooting was a couple of days ago. So, it's going to be. It could be a bad one. I don't know. And it's also, I think last couple of years, the ice storms. We had Ida a few years ago, and we had Ian last year, and now Idalia. So it's something about those ice storms, I guess.
Yeah.
But this one's real brief. It's haiku. It's again called Target Sunshine State. That's the first line of the poem.
Okay, go ahead.
Of the haiku, rather. Is it up on the screen?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Target Sunshine State. Ideally is in the Gulf. It's time to prepare. So my hope is everyone in Florida spent the day doing what they need to do. I never lived through one, so I don't know, but I guess it's putting up boards on the windows and making sure you have enough gas and evacuating if you need to. But come Wednesday morning, it's going to arrive, and it might be a bad one. So this was just kind of written to memorialize this because it's breaking so fast that it'll be here before we know.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Definitely hope everybody stays safe out there in Florida. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
That was Rob Harris with Target Sunshine State. And next, let's go to Lucy Chow. Hey, Lucy, are you there? Okay, we'll circle back to Lucy. Doesn't seem to be working. Let's go to Laura Berg instead.
Hi, Tim. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Laura.
Well, this is from last week's prompt, and I made a villanelle, and it was just kind of lugubrious, so I disassembled it, and this is what remains.
Interesting. Okay. Let me pull it up for everybody. Let's see. Hang on one second. See if I can find it. Submittable is slow today. Did you submit it there?
I did it on you can get it in the email.
In the email?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try again.
I just recently, or it's on Submittable from a little while back.
Okay.
Is
it the ghost whale?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Unsubmittable. Yeah. I found it.
It's changed a little bit since then, but so it's called Baki Kujira, which is a Japanese imaginary animal that is a whale, but it's only bones. It's a kind of a ghost whale.
Oh, that's really interesting. I haven't ever heard of that.
So this is called Baki Kujira. All we could see of Baki Kujira was the skeleton he floated in when that ghost whale breached the brine. Cosmic blue eels writhed inside him. Royal crested terns soared through his bones. We sharpened our harpoons, but he had no flesh to pierce. Monster, we cried, as if to blame him for our cruelties. Whose phantom could he be? We cowered under tarps in our fishing boats and prayed. And when at last he yawed away, we scuttled back to our cozy port to wait. A ribbed moon arose. He floated in and beached. No meat, so we filled ourselves with marrow. We used to say back then, after feasting on the divine, we must preserve its remains. We buried him in a shrine hewn of cypress-stained vermilion. Some nights, sweating, we still dream a ghost whale swims inside us, and we become the bones he floats within.
Oh, another poem with a great ending. I love that. And the ghost whale is such a fascinating concept. I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Laura Berg with Bake Kujira. Hopefully I'm saying that relatively accurately. Not a word I'm familiar with. But that's the name of a ghost whale in Japanese tales. Fascinating for the last week's prompt to write about a cryptid. That was great. Okay, let's go next to Bishwajit Mishra.
Hi, team. Good evening.
Hey, good evening. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too. It was a nice interview. Very nice and such variety. It's one of those rare interviews where each poem is different.
It definitely was. He definitely finds ways to make it so.
Yeah, very nice. I had the prompt poem for last week. That's about the word picked at random. But if you have time, I have the villanelle poem from the week before, which I missed when I was camping. But I'll read the prompt poem for this one. Then we have time. I'll read the other one otherwise.
Okay, sounds good.
So this is called Floor Show.
Mm-hmm.
And I used the same thing, my dictionary app I opened, and the word of the day was floor show.
Okay, yeah, great.
Floor show. A poster with a 19th century look by the door showed me dancers. Everything else as well looked aged, straight out of a John Wayne, as Billy commented looking at the pictures. The lady by the door said the next show starts at 10 and for $20 entry. A floor show? Nah, I didn't think much of it. And she suggested why not I try the pit if a drink was all I wanted. A floor show, but the floors are kind of hanging. The grounds can't handle any more heat. They had taken enough in 5 years of the rush, when everybody wanted the dirt in their hands, more like in their pants. And everything is just ashes now. Frost is all they have, and they need to preserve. I walked by the place which I figured was the pit, which seemed too crowded. I wanted to unwind in lighter company after a long drive, and after my engine oil light lit up, and I put me in a gloom, getting the suit on my hand topping up, and that uncanny weariness looming on the highway with too many signs for Animal Crossing, and a few and far between gas stations, which didn't seem to fit any particular time slot in terms of technology or aesthetics. And ending up with a campsite across the river that I had to ferry over with pit holes for toilets and broken water supply, my scarce stock of water used for hand washing. I also wanted to use the washrooms while I got some liquid and solid in me, and caught up with the local stories at a less busy bar, still managing to stay vegetarian. Next morning, I had to wait until the shops opened to grab a coffee because it turned out that I was out of propane. Then use the washroom, of course, grab a scone as well before getting in the road. But the problem was, after COVID, I could not even clean my fingers, multitasking between eating the scone, drinking coffee, and driving. A floor show, indeed. The pictures, the verses, the animals who made my day showing up during the day. At night, it would have been a different show. And indeed, the gap between the floor and the ground, permafrost gives a better hope, gives history the guilt.
A very interesting floor show by Bishwajit Mishra.
Thank you.
And then you had another one too. I think it's short, so let's do this one too.
That's the. Okay, let me just grab this because I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that's good. It's After Hunger, right? I have the right one up.
No. That's Poet's Response.
Oh, okay.
Because that's a poet, Jayanth Mahapatra in my state. He was our physics professor.
Okay.
He passed away last night.
Oh, it's the Villanelle. Yeah, that's right. He can't always be stuck in the swamp. Okay.
Yeah, I took your advice, literally, for a cryptid. This is what you're talking about, right? That swamp ape?
Yeah, let's do the swamp. Yeah, exactly. The swamp ape.
Yeah. He can't always be stuck in the swamp. Once in a while, he needs to go out. When it gets too hot in the swamp, food and bit of air is all he goes to scout. Colder land his cousins roam about, but he's stuck in the steaming camp. Once in a while, he needs to go out. Bats, they say he went once to rout, as he tested a tower to put his stamp. Food and bit of air's all he goes to scout. A stinking skunk ape, he's they shout. Who's not underneath their pomp? Once in a while he needs to go out. Harrier I've seen stretch their snout. When I fall asleep, they come to romp. Food and bit of air's all he goes to scout. Whether made under a drunken bout or by a bored life needing a revamp, once in a while he needs to go out. Food and bit of air's all he goes to scout.
Yeah, I love that swamp ape. That's great. That swamp ape going out. Excellent Villanelle. Thanks, Bishwajit, for sharing that.
Thank you. Have a good night, Tim.
Yep, good night. The Bishwajit Mishra with He Can't Always Be Stuck in the Swamp, a swamp ape poem. And then let me to this poetry marathon. Let me pull this up. It's thepoetrymarathon.com. So find that here. The goal, write one poem every hour for 24 hours straight. The reward, in one day you will write a chapbook worth of poems, an admirable achievement. So this is very interesting. Go to thepoetrymarathon.com, which is what we were talking about earlier on the show. Meant to share that link. Very interesting. 24 poems in 24 hours. All right, let's go next to Dick Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick.
Boy, that the two of you talking in the interview today, you were the perfect interviewer for Pedro. That was really wonderful.
Oh, that's great to hear. I love Pedro. He's a fascinating person. So it was just fun to talk to him. I've talked to him before, of course, but not at that length. So it was really fun.
Yeah, it was great. I was reminded. I used to teach elementary school math.
Mm-hmm.
And, the question that fourth and fifth graders ask is, how will I use this later in life?
Uh-huh.
And my answer, and I think it resonated, I taught for 16 years, was that it was a language, that you were now fluent in another language. And this is the language of philosophers. And as you become more fluent in it, you can have broader conversations in the world. And I think the fact that it was such an off-center answer, just the kids threw up their hands and said, really? It was an answer I think that many of them have thought about later, but not at the time.
Yeah, it's definitely true too. I think a great answer to that question, and definitely the way it is. It is a language. It's a way of thinking too, a mode of being almost, and so.
Well, and I did, Katie said earlier, she's not good at math, but that's treating it as like a subject rather than a language. And
I'm not good at language. Other languages.
Well, a different kind of language. I mean, not foreign language, but as another way of communicating with each other. So, to me, it's not a subject. It's just another. It's just another part of the language that we speak together.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I think I'll read. I sent you two Poets Respond poems, but I think I'll read the one I sent a revision in email to you just a moment ago.
Okay, the hurricane.
Yeah, the hurricane.
Okay.
Just because it's sort of like in the never-ending story of me having no idea what a single poetic voice is. And so somehow this one came out as a persona poem, which I've never, written before. This felt a little Rachel Custer-like in terms of, adopting. Only this one is a farther away persona.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, let's hear it.
It was just prompted by, the confluence of the hurricane and the earthquake and near you when you were in Texas.
Yeah, it was. I was in Texas. Kids were here, and they felt the earthquake and thought it was fun, but they did not. The hurricane was a dud. They were like, it was like it rained all day. So.
Oh wow. Better than beats the alternative.
It definitely does. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the hurricane, the earthquake, Rosie and me. Some said the storm caused the earthquake. Some said it was the gaze. The seismologists say it was a deep thrust fault, but all I know is the dishes clattered, the dog twisted his chain so tight I had to call Hank to help get it undone. And all this talk about a hurricane has me going back to the book of Revelation, making sure I know the rules. But I am no Christian. I'm nothing that I know of except mad as hell. My daughter Rosie's gone off, and if I find out that she's with that Carter girl again, I'll get down my 30-aught and go over to their place and let the barrel speak for me. The rain's picked up, and I hear County Road 6 is closed now, and I'm so fucking alone. The power's out, so I'm watching Fox on my phone and feel the house shake again. The panes rattle and water's seeping under the sills. This is real scary, and grown man me just comes undone, and in between one lightning flash and the next, I know. I've got to call Rosie and tell her I'm sorry, that me trying to keep her from loving on whoever shakes her bones is like supposing I can stop the wind with my fists.
Yeah, great poem. I love that. I remember that from the Poet Respond. And it's fascinating, too. I saw a post on somebody said, watch out, earthquakes are coming because of the hurricane. And there's like an urban legend or a myth, that it's because of the water lubricating the fault. But it's actually true because of the electromagnetic effects of a big storm. It's kind of like a sunspot, but it's an earth spot. And then there's the piezoelectric effect, which, electricity moving through the mantle. So it actually is tied together, but not in the way that the conventional wisdom thought. But very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Dick. That tie was strange. Right as the hurricane came over, a five-pointer in Ojai, which is not too far away.
Yeah. Well, thanks all. And I've loved the open mics tonight. Like the variety of poems. You were talking a little bit about whether they were, sort of faded, like the memes in the background that come through that were always there. And it's just impossible. Like the infinite variety that we've heard in just 10 poems tonight is
yeah, it's a great point. It's like one of those things. There's more possibilities than is like time in the universe, like more than an electron could flip or whatever. Yeah,
that's what it's felt like tonight. Just all the variety from a prompt and from the news. It's just terrific.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I agree. And the open lines just get better and better. It's just one of the great things about the Rattlecast. And thanks for being a part of it always, Dick.
Thanks. Bye.
Yep. Bye. Dick Westheimer with the hurricane, the earthquake, Rosie and me. Let's go to Nancy Tinnell next.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Nancy. Good to see you.
This has been a great evening.
It has. It definitely has.
Oh, absolutely. I call this my poetry school.
Oh, that's great.
Every Monday.
That's what we like it to be.
Yeah. I did pick a dictionary word from an actual Merriam-Webster in my son's old room, left over from his college days, I guess. And I landed on the word paltry. And I thought, what will I do with that? But here's what I've got.
Okay.
Paltry. Barest essentials, always in want, little to eat, body gaunt, sleeping rough, stooping low, faking tough to avoid a blow. Sidewalk trash swirls in the wind, shoe sole flaps, water seeps in. Shelter at night, streets in the day, far from home, no other way. 18th and Main, hot meal for free, coat closet items, too short sleeves. Paltry assistance, diminished hope, dirty existence with paltry soap.
Very interesting. And that is there a meter to that? I'm trying to figure out what it is. It sounds very meter.
I did do the rhymes and try, and it's little 4-line, very short lines, paltry lines.
Well, that's great.
Really
and
meager.
You can feel the natural meter come out in the poem.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Nancy.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. That was paltry. Paltry, not poultry. I almost said poultry, and then I thought I did say poultry, but I actually said paltry. That's paltry by Nancy Tinnell. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks.
Okay, and then let's see. And next, let's go to Jayanthi Rangan.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, how are you tonight?
Good. I love the show because I never thought you could use CGTA into a poem.
He's got another one that's really fascinating that we didn't. You'll have to. It was right across the page from that. This is a sonnet, and you can't see it. You'll have to glance at it back on the YouTube screen. But I'll put it on the screen right now. It's a sonnet that only uses punctuation marks. But when you say slash arrow, single quote dash. Like the dash rhymes with a slash. It's like an actual, I don't know. You'll have to see it to get it, but it's a sonnet with no words but it actually is iambic pentameter in a Shakespearean sonnet, which is fascinating. He just comes up with the strangest things, that Pedro.
I know. So today, I'm going to read a prompt poem, but this is such an unusual word. I was looking up the meaning, and I do not have a dictionary at home. So this is online. And do you have it? I sent it to you.
Yeah, I have it on the screen. It's Zagan Ruhe. Zugen Ruhe, maybe.
Yeah, this is a German word. It's called Jugendruhe.
Interesting. Well, I was not close, but that's okay.
I had to look it up because I had no clue which language it belonged to and what it's trying to, what its meaning could be. So it turns out, and the meaning comes through in the poem. The migration anxiety, Jugendruhe, the migration anxiety that wants to hack, slash, wrench out to the land of compel, cross the mountains and shores, one mission, fly miles into unknown, with the genes map of geo-boundaries, with the pairing ache of hunger and the bloat of gobble, the free miles vanish airborne by the wings. A brief breather in the flap, and the gravity of dirt yanks the aerial extensions. The flock continues without a backwards glance.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Zugenru, maybe the migration anxiety. Very interesting word, interesting poem. Thanks for sharing that, Janti.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Have a good night. Okay, a couple more we've got. Let's see. Well, just one more, I think, maybe, is Lucy Chow. Lucy, are you there this time?
Hello, Tim. I'm here.
Hey, Lucy. Yeah, great to hear you. Sorry we missed you before, but glad we got you now.
Actually, this prompt immediately appealed to me because I'm a huge lover of strange words. And I just got to the website of Merriam-Webster and got their word of the day, and it was a word from French, I believe, a frisson, like a shiver or a chill that goes under your spine. It's not a word that is unknown to me. I know the word, and it's not that strange. It's relatively familiar to me. So I find myself still operating in a somehow rational channel, but but the poem sort of took off of its own accord and surprised me from there. It's a relatively long poem, but I think it's a strange wood to walk into. So I'll read it when you put that up.
Yeah, go ahead. It's up for everybody.
Okay. Trans frisson. You shudder into the sink. Off-white to snuff gray to rot black, you look like charred cabbage roses that have non-compost mentous pressed petals through a paper shredder, or branched corals bleached, then bleared, smeared with a smudge and smell of coal dust or car exhaust. Telephora gambadrin. I had not expected our encounter to be like this, against stainless steel, out of place, inscrutable, your chalk-white body already fossil-like in life, severed from fragrant composts of pine needles packed with ice bags and stamped for a plane ride to be torn into needle-fine filaments, scrambled with minced green chili peppers, eggs, and rice. Had I found you piercing through the dark duff of the Yunnan pine, an animate marmoreal bone crossed between an antler and a jingo leaf, felt your yielding reluctance when pulled slowly from the taminoes, and contemplated for a while the hollow left after harvesting, your wilderness would have seemed more of this earth, creaturely. Mom, born Yunnanese, forager as a kid, tells me, unlike the blackening of the peppered moth under duress of soot, your nigrescence is natural, oxidation by connivance of time and bland air. This explanation makes you no more explicable. I tell myself you are but what a field guide tells you to be, the last wild mushroom to be replaced by tame genomic reprints in labs that markets. It remains, when we are writing this, unamenable to artificial cultivation. I breathe a little easier, a modest mystery unbreached, a tiny oasis in gargantuan deserts of despotic gardening. Scattered in the sink, indifferent to your umami, you beg a song beyond human language, beyond even the well-meaning strivings of eco-poetics or biosemiotics. Translation is a violent form of expression. We imperialists have known this for too long. My fingers begin to translate you, splitting you into spicules, forcing out the dirt, the tiny stones, residuals of the life you've led. It is summer, monsoon season. Water runs cold over your body, your memory of the world being meticulously disparted like strands of loved hair. Then the hand that rubs tenderly is transfixed by a pin the lovers snuck there, blood broached by a brooch whose entirety is a purple-brown pine needle. I had not expected my response to be such a violent frisson. The syringe pricks only skin deep, but the icy fires from woods, lovely dark and deep, have transfused shivering knowledge through your pine-pinned telephora body into my transpierced translator's body. The transfixer shakes and breaks. I bleed. Cold water running. The trans-free song, complete. And just to say, Telephora gambadine is a kind of mushroom that's very rare. And I believe it's found only in China, and it's a very prized delicacy here.
Yeah, very interesting, Lucy. As always, so much to learn from these poems. So many words and so much rich language, and then scientific facts too. Always fascinating. Always appreciate it. Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Yep. Have
Good
a
night.
good day. It's a Lucy Chow with Transfriction. And then Mike Bales is next. Sorry, Mike. I didn't see you there in the corner of the list. Sorry for missing you and saying we were done, but we got you still. So how you doing, Mike?
Pretty good. This poem kind of reminds me of all the back and forth I'm doing to get out this book between the editor and me and the layout person. He tends to lay out things sometimes his own way, and I say no. Then sometimes the feature in Word capitalizes lines that shouldn't be capitalized, so there's a lot of back and forth. For anagram people, I've got to mention Dora Malik has a great book of anagram poems. It's called Stet.
Mm-hmm.
But this poem I heard something from one of your critique things where I reversed the poem.
Uh-huh.
So I wrote this one way and reversed it, where I worked backwards, except when I came to the first stanza, I kept it in the original order.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a poem called Instant.
Interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Sailing a sea of imagination to see clouds as ancient vessels, reflections of the sun, the poem looks to endless skies. Of a blank page and the calling from desires created draft after draft. Into a greater whole in words when changing lines, a poem gets its hands dirty. Creating new form and shaping soil in its palms, it has all it needs, the poem discovers. The poem, while taking a walk on a journey unknown, trips and falls to the ground.
Oh, really interesting to see that reversed. Yeah, that was an incident. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, always a pleasure. It's Mike Bales with incidents. All right, well, we are crumbing up on time, so that's perfect timing. Let's do the Sciku really quickly. And the Sciku this week, another one written on the plane. This was based on, there were a whole bunch of, I wrote a bunch of Sciku. This one was the one that was sort of the most fun. And so I thought we'd share this one. If you can see this, and again, I gotta shrink. They really like to make phone-based. Okay, there we go. So, scientists solve mystery of why thousands of octopi, or octopus, migrate to deep-sea thermal springs. I always thought octopi was a plural, but maybe not. Anyway, there's a beautiful photo, too, of the octopus migrating to these thermal springs. And it turns out what they do, so thousands of these octopus off the coast of California migrate every year to lay eggs there. And the reason is because those nutrient-rich warm waters make their eggs mature faster. And so they're born more mature and more ready to like survive in the environment. And so their offspring survive better by migrating to this thermal hot spring off the coast of California. So very interesting little haiku there. We got some video too, which we won't play, but we're off the coast of in the Davison Seamount. There's this octopus garden, they called it. I love that phrase, octopus garden. So here was the Sciku then, inspired by that. Schoolyard, the octopus garden offshore. Schoolyard, the octopus garden offshore. That is your Sciku for the week, and that is the show for the week. Katie Dozier is still here on the Zoom, so let's pull up Katie, and we can mention the prompt for next week. Hey, Katie, are you still there?
Hi, I am. Great Sciku. I'm so thrilled to learn that an octopus garden is a real thing. I thought it was just something the Beatles made up for their song, but it's a real thing.
It is, yeah, and it's those little cute little guys all being born all at once right off the water there.
Aww.
So what's the prompt for next week? This is inspired by Pedro. What do you got for us?
So next week, there were multiple this week that would have adhered, I think, to this prompt, as it turned out, including my own. But this is going to be to write a sonnet with a number in it. This has to contain a number and be a sonnet. Of course, we will give kudos to people who write sonnets that aren't our lazy American sonnets, but I'm one to talk, as I tend to write lazy American sonnets.
Well, you are American, so forgiven.
Yeah, it's true. I can't really escape that one.
Yeah, write a sonnet with a number in it. And like we said, we're going to be talking about meter on the Poetry Space on Thursday. And I had a really interesting interview with Annie Finch, who wants to get us out of the iambic sort of the iambic patriarchy, maybe, or something that she was talking about. It's just the way that we're sort of fixated on the iamb, but there's all this like anapestic meter and all sorts of different meters too. It's really fascinating to talk about meter in poetry. The Poetry Space is always fun. And now X, Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, allows, you don't need the app anymore. So if anyone wants to participate, they can find either my Timothy Green or Katie_Dozier on Twitter, and then find the link to our space and just jump in and talk and share your opinions about meters. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading and discovering some metered poems that perhaps I haven't heard before too.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely read a lot of poems on the space, and I do like formal poetry, so it's gonna be nice to have a topic that week. So thanks, Katie. Looking forward to that, and thanks for sharing next week's prompt.
Thanks for the awesome show tonight.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, it was Katie Dozier, of course, our prompt poems editor. And that is going to be the show for this week. Now, next week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Elizabeth McMoon Tatengo. You might recognize Elizabeth because she's been she's won the Phrastic Challenge several times. She's been in Poet Responds several times. She's also a librarian in our Librarian Poets issue, which we did a couple years ago. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about she's a short form type poet, a lot of haiku, a lot of just very short, tight little poems is what she likes to do. Her book is Various Lies, which is a few years old, but still very interesting. So we'll be reading poems from there and talking to Elizabeth, then doing the prompt, write a sonnet with a number in it for next week's show, Rattlecast number 209, Monday, September 4th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, I will talk to you later. Good night.